I don't get to choose, but I have a little bit of influence. I'll certainly kind of throw it over the fence. Okay, I'm going to get started. I'm just going to do it. Oh, I've almost got everybody memorized now, so I can tell who's not here. Okay, we're gonna come heck or high water. We're gonna finish bonds today. Basic valuation of bonds. So we spent a lot of time last week talking about bonds, the definition of bonds, looking at different types of bonds, interest rates, how interest rates flow, difference between long-term and short-term rates, how to read some of the bond rate information to try and anticipate whether something's going to change with respect to bond risk. We saw that kind of at the end of the last class. Where you can, again, one of the things to keep in mind is as you look at how bonds or interest rates function, they tend to be a leading indicator. You tend to see movements in the interest rates ahead of changes to the economy. So you see the 2008 financial crisis, you started seeing changes in interest rates in 2007. We're now going to take a jump into bond valuation. So bond valuation is essentially time value of money. So when we're talking time value of money, that's essentially this combination of you've got a stream of expected future cash flows discounted at a discount rate. That discount rate is a function of the underlying risk associated with the asset. And so as a result, all you're looking at here, all a bond is, the valuation of a bond is the expected future cash flows discounted at that discount rate. And what we're looking for, if you're one of these really smart type investors, what you're looking for is to calculate your theoretical bond valuation, look at the market valuation, and see whether it's overvalued or undervalued. So what we're going to talk about today and try and move through relatively rapidly, because we've had the principles behind this in chapter 4, is really looking at the components of the present value of a bond in a couple different dimensions. And the practical use of this is to, one, look at how you would price a bond yourself if you were to issue one, or two, if you see bonds that are trading in the market, to be able to calculate a theoretical value for that bond based upon your own analysis of what the interest rate should be or the discount rate should be, the expected future cash flows are, and then be able to shift that and compare that against the actual market price and figure out if it's over or underpriced. If it's underpriced, you would buy, and if it's overpriced, you would sell or sell short. If you're or not, you wouldn't invest. Or if you're into taking a little bit more risk, you could sell short. Essentially, you could sell something you don't have with a promise to pay it back later because the value is going to drop. So, digging into the math, the basic valuation model for a bond is the same as it was for every other expected future cash flow. That's why the concepts in chapter 4 were so important, is because all this is the sum of the present values and the expected future cash flows going out to N. What are the components, do you think, of the expected future cash flow on a bond?
The par value.
Yeah, the principal, the par value, what you're going to get paid back when the bond matures, and what else? The interest, the periodic interest payments, if any. Because again, we talked about zero coupon bonds where there may be no periodic interest payments. But essentially, all you're looking at here is the expected future cash flows discounted back at a discount rate. You've got those two components. The amount of money the firm borrows and promises to pay back. Those two numbers may be a little bit different. Because in a zero coupon bond situation, you're going to borrow, let's say, the par value is $1,000, but you're only going to get $600 or $600 at the time at which the bond's issued because there's no coupon payments. In a normal situation, the bond is issued essentially at face value, par value, maturity value, $1,000, plus you're going to receive periodic interest payments, normally paid every 6 months. On a typical corporate, they're paid every 6 months, and you're going to get those coupon payments periodically from the time the bond is issued until the bond matures. The sum of these two streams of cash flows are the expected future cash flow of the bond, and then again, you're going to discount that at a discount rate. And that's just what you're seeing here. There should be nothing, this conceptually should feel no different than all the work you did in chapter 4. It's just we've applied the word bond to it. We don't memorize formulas, but we're going to walk through a bond for Genesco. I'm going to ask, instead of walking through this formula, which most of you can read, this is a 15-year, $1,000 bond at a 10% coupon. So what you see here is you've got the payments of the $100 annually and a repayment of the $1,000. Based upon the fact that this bond is being issued at $1,000 and you're borrowing $1,000, what's the discount rate or the market rate or the market-driven rate of return required on this bond at the time of issue? 10%. If the bond value, 1,000, is equal to the par value or the face value of 1,000, then by definition, the discount rate, the interest rate, the risk-adjusted rate, required rate of return is going to be equal to the coupon rate, 10%. So this means at the time at which this bond was issued, you had essentially it was issued at the market rate at 10%. A lot of times bonds will issue at or near the market rate. So this is not unusual. What do you think happens if you go down the road for a year and the required rate of return on this bond goes to 12%? The bond's already issued at 10%. It's paying interest at 10%. What do you think happens to the price or the value of that bond? It goes down. Why? Yeah, you need to get your expected return up to 12. And so if you're going to buy that bond in the market, you might only want to pay $850 for that bond. If your required return goes to 8%, what does the value of this bond do? It goes up because you only need to get 8%. It was issued and it's going to pay you 10%. You pay $100 a year, plus you're going to get $1,000 back. So you may pay $1,100 for that bond. When the required rate of return rises, bond prices fall. When the required rate of return falls, bond prices rise. The two operate in opposition to each other. And when the bonds are normally issued, if they're at par, if the value is at par, then the stated interest rate is equal to the market required rate of return. As I mentioned, most bonds have semi-annual compounding, essentially have coupon payments every 6 months. So when you've got coupon payments every 6 months, you essentially divide your interest rate in half. You divide the coupon amount, the interest rate in half. The coupon amount then becomes 2 payments of 50 instead of 1 payment of 100 in the Genesco example. And you've got a maturity rate that compounds more rapidly. You're going to be asked to calculate a few things, and none of them are horribly difficult, and most of them have Excel formulas that are actually directly linked to what you're being asked to calculate. The first one is you're going to be asked to calculate things called yield to maturity. Yield to maturity is the average rate of return earned on a bond if you hold it all the way until the bond pays off. So in the Genesco example, if you buy the bond for $1,000 and you hold it for the 15 years and you collect all the coupons and you collect the principal, what was your yield to maturity? Yield is always going to be expressed in terms of a percentage. So what was yield to maturity in that case? 10%. Why? Yeah, that's what it was. It was price to yield 10%. And you're going to hear terms like that, price to yield. And so if it was price to yield at 12%, you'd get a 12% yield to maturity, even if the coupon said that it was higher. Suppose that you were offered a 10-year, 8% coupon, $1,000 par value bond at a price of $875. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's unpack this a little bit. You've got a couple variables. How much are the periodic interest is paid semi-annually? How much is the periodic payments and at what frequency?
4% every 6 months.
So you're going to get 4% every 6 months. What's 4% of 1,000? $40. So your periodic cash flow is going to be $40, $40, $40, $40, all the way out. How many times are you going to get paid $40? 20 times. You've got an 8% coupon. So we now calculated out that that's based upon the par value. That's 20 payments of $40 a piece. What are you going to get paid at the end? You're going to get paid $1,000. So at the end of 10 years, you're going to get paid $1,000. How much did you pay for? What's the present value? And I'm using that term. I'm using that term because it's important when you're using Excel. What's the present value of that bond? The present value of that bond is $875. So here's what you've got. You've got a series of cash flows. The present value of those cash flows is $875. That's the current value of the bond. Current value of the bond equals present value. You've got a series of cash flows. So you've got expected future cash flows of $40 per every six months, 20 times. And at the end, you've got a $1,000 repayment of par value. And the question is, what's the bond's yield to maturity? Essentially, if you wanted to do it out by hand, this is what it would look like. And out here in the 20th period, you've got the discount, or you've got the $1,000 getting back. And what we're trying to do is solve for R, solve for the rate. I didn't put the answer. It's brilliant. Okay. Who's got it? I see some of you working it in Excel. For those of you that don't know, Excel has some cool, nifty things in it. I tend to build tables in Excel, and you don't need to just number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can do 1, 2, and then just stretch it across and it'll number itself. We're going to put the cash flows. That's the stream of cash flows. That 875, remember in Excel, when you've got a present value, it tends to be written in the negative. You stretch all your cash flows out and you go, okay, what am I looking for? What am I trying to solve for in this particular case? You go back to the yield to maturity. We're trying to solve for a rate. So as a result, number of periods equals 40. Oh, we don't want that one. I'm going to use a different formula. Okay, I'm going to show you kind of a neat trick. Which is a what-if analysis and the goal seek. If you haven't used goal seek before, it's a pretty nifty feature. Goal seek essentially allows you to drive something to a specific value. So what I've done in this particular case is I've set up the cash flows. I said, okay, we've got a total of $1,800 worth of cash flows coming in. You got the periodic interest plus the final payment. We've got a net present value here of those expected future cash flows. What we're looking for is to be able to drive that net present value to 875 by changing the value in this cell. And so what this says is the rate is 5%. Now, is the rate here $5%? What is it? So the yield, what's the bond's yield to maturity? It's semi-annual. So what do you do with that 5%? You double it. So now it's 10%. So the bond's yield to maturity is 10%. Do you all follow how I did that in Excel? I'm feeling like, oh no, I didn't follow the damn thing. Yes, sir.
Wait, why'd you double it instead of?
If you look at the Excel, so that's a great question. That's the trip question. If you look at Excel, what this is calculating is the rate per period, right? And what we put out here was going all the way out to 20 periods. And the reason we put 20 periods out here is because it pays interest semi-annually. And so you said, okay, I got 40 instead of 8, because remember, it's a $1,000 bond at 8%, right? Paying interest semi-annually. So you said, okay, 40. Then that 5%, so what this is calculating is the rate, the yield on a 6-month basis at each period. Excel's not smart enough to figure that out for you. It thinks that each one of these is a year. And so what we then need to do is double it up. Essentially go, no, we're getting this over 2 years. So yield maturity is really 10%. Just like you would divide it in half if you were going, okay, they gave me an annual number and I need to look at it semi-annual, I'm going to divide by 2. If they give you a semi-annual number, you need to make it annual, you multiply by 2. So yield maturity is 10%. Clear as mud? Like I said, the key to success in this class is this combination of knowing how to deconstruct these word problems and going, okay, what's it really asking me for? And then knowing how to use the Excel functions. On the math side, it's really those two issues. That's why we spend so much time on like, okay, what do these words mean on the definitions? Because if you can't pull apart the word problem, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The Excel piece is generally the easier piece. Because once you learn the Excel stuff, it's just rinse and repeat over and over and over again. It's really how do I take each of these pieces out? And we tend to make mistakes. I tend to make mistakes because I'll miss this sentence. Interest from this bond is paying semi-annually. All of a sudden I go, oh, it's 5%. When you get the final, which is not multiple choice, when you get in real life, which is never multiple choice, you're going to end up going, oh crap, it's half or double what it should be. So pay attention to things like pulling out the semi-annual piece and pulling out the calculation. So the yield to maturity on this particular bond is 10%. Yield to call. Yield to call is essentially the same calculation, except you're looking at the call point and the call price. Remember, what's a call?
When they can sort of one of them.
Yeah, when they can call the bonds back in. When the issuer goes, I'm going to redeem these bonds early. And the call price is usually what? Higher or lower than the issue price? Higher. So normally what you have is, if you've got a call price, you've got N that is shorter than the maturity date. And the call price is normally higher than the bond issue price. So in the case of a call, this particular bond was a $1,000 bond, right? The call price might be $1,100, might be $1,050. But it's the same math. The thing to remember in this bond stuff, or in any of this finance stuff, is it's the same math. You just need to pull out the different pieces. So in this particular case, you're going to have interest payments up to the call date. And then you're going to have call price. And I'll pull up that same spreadsheet and we'll put in an example of a call, because I don't think I have one in here. So let's assume for a moment you've got the same bond, but we could call it after 5 years, and the call price is $1,050. What changes do I make to this timeline?
After 5 years?
Yep, so the call is at the 5-year point instead of 10. So the 5-year point would be it would be a period 10, right? Because it's semi-annual interest. How much money would I get in period 10? I'd get 1090. Tell me why I get 1090. The interest of 40. And then out here, I've got nothing, right? Now we want to go, now we've got a situation where I paid $875. We've got a new cash flow stream, which is essentially the yield to call. How do we calculate the yield to call? You go to data, what if analysis, goal seek. Set cell B5, which is that number, to 875, which is what we paid for this bond, by changing cell there, 6.08. What's the yield to call? 12.16%. Why? Because it's semi-annual, so you double it. No, it's the same math. It's the same process. It's just you're pulling out different numbers and you're putting them into the cash flow stream. What I've done historically, and I think a couple of you that have come up and that I've met with, what I've recommended you guys do, is as you go through your homeworks, as you work through some of these problems, build a master Excel sheet with each one of these things, going, okay, I'm trying to solve for a yield to call or for a yield to maturity because they're calculated the same way. I've now got a template to be able to use. And so then whenever I get one of those problems, I go, okay, that's a yield to call. I've labeled it yield to call or yield to maturity down at the bottom. I pull up that template, I just fill in the numbers based upon what the word problem's telling me, and I hit goal seek or I solve for X, and it spins it through without having to rebuild this every time. If you start with, and you still have some of those things from the first set of classes or from chapter 4, and if not, you can still build them. There's plenty of time, and you'll use them. If you build up this library of templates, the homework goes faster and faster and faster because you're going to find that it's the same darn calculations over and over and over again because it's just expected future cash flow discounted at a rate. And all we're trying to do is either find a present value, future value, or a discount rate. At the end of the day, we're trying to solve for one of those. You got a variable and you've got two constants, and you're trying to solve for it. You start building these templates out, it makes it very easy to do, and you get familiar with the math, you'll get familiar with the process. Then it comes down to, how do I pull that information out of the word problem? And at that point, it's just practice. We talked about this briefly. If the coupon rate is 10% and the required rate of return is 10%, the bond sells at par. If rates rise, the bond sells for less. If rates fall, required rate of return falls, the bond sells for more. There's a very strong and it's not even not going to happen. Every time the bond interest rate, required rate of return on a bond rises, the bond price falls. There's always an inverse relationship between required rate of return and bond price. You can calculate it because, again, if you change the required rate of return, it'll calculate the present value. But at the end of the day, understand that if the bond is selling at par, then the coupon rate is the required rate of return, and normally they're priced to par. Changes in bond values over time. Whenever the going rate of return or the going rate of interest equals the coupon rate, sells at par. Increase in rates causes the price to fall. Decrease in rates causes the price to rise. You've now heard that like 6 times. It's an important concept. Because not only does that apply to bonds, it applies to stocks and any other financial instrument. If the required rate rises because the cash flow stream remains constant, the price falls. So it's an important concept to understand. Market value of a bond will always approach par value as maturity date approaches, provided the firm doesn't go bankrupt. Why? So let's tear this apart. The market value of a bond, so the price that it trades at the market, will always approach its par value, the amount of money that you're going to get paid as of the last day of the bond when it matures. As maturity date approaches. Why?
You keep on payments and less time. The value is, let's say, 1,000. In June you pay 1,100, in July you pay 1050, and then 1040.
Yeah, as you get, when you think about a discount rate, the discount rate is, for the time value of money, the further away you are from a point in time, the more that a change in that discount rate is going to have on the price of a bond, right? So if you're way out and the discount rate is low or high, those outside cash flows are less impacted. The closer you get in, you're looking at a payment that's going to be made in 6 months. You've reduced your liquidity risk premium, you've reduced your default risk premium, unless it's going to go bankrupt. You've reduced your maturity premium. You've essentially said, I know I'm going to get $1,000 in 6 months, so how much am I willing to pay for it? Well, a relatively small amount over or less than the $1,000 I'm going to get. So the bond price at the end of the day before a bond matures, or the day before our example bond matures or is called, so the day before this bond is called, how much would you be willing to pay for it? Yeah, you'd be willing to pay about $1089.50, because the next day you're going to get $1090. So you're not going to pay more than $1090 for it. And you're not going to pay, and the seller's not going to take much less than $1090 for it, because they know they're going to get it the next day. As you go further back in time, you were willing to pay $875 for it back here to get a yield to maturity of or a yield to call of 12.16. But as you get closer and closer, the logic says, hey, there's no risk that I'm not going to get paid. And so as we approach maturity date, you're going to end up essentially at the maturity at the par value, which is what you're going to get paid back, plus you're going to get paid the interest. And if there's a call premium, you're going to get a call premium. And that's just showing it graphically. A bond yield, and we just looked at this in a little different way. The bond yield is equal to the current interest yield plus the capital gains yield. The current interest yield is the coupon payments. The capital gains yield is a change in price between what you pay for it and what you get paid back. And so when you look at our example bond back here, and it was priced to yield, or it was originally issued to yield $40, 8%, right? But we're looking at a rate of 12%, 12.16% yield to call. How much of this is coupon rate? When you look at the bond yield to maturity, or when you look at the bond yield, the return, you've got two components. You've got interest and you've got capital gains.
Anything that's above what the market rate should be. So if it's supposed to be, then
So the interest yield So in this particular case, if you're looking at the bond yield, how much of this is driven by interest? How much of it is driven by capital gains? The total return is what? 12.16, 12.17. This much is driven by interest. 9.14, because it's the value at the purchase date divided by the interest. So the difference is going to be the capital gains. So you're going to have essentially 3.03% is going to be driven by capital gains. 9.14% is going to be driven by the interest piece. The math here isn't hard, obviously, because we're just walking through it. It's pretty easy. It's knowing what math to put against the problem that becomes a challenge. So again, practice. This is a classic, practice. That's why we do the quiz things, and that's why there's so many questions on them. But this is a relatively straightforward math problem. Don't let it kind of psych you out and make it harder than you think it is, because it's not going to be that difficult. Interest rate risk on a bond. Interest rate risks are driven by changes in bond price due to changing interest rates. Remember, if rates rise, bond prices fall. That's the interest rate price risk. Interest rate reinvestment risk, oh, I got rate in there twice, is essentially when you get that money out of the bond, you then have to do something with it. You have to reinvest it somewhere. You're going to take that $40 that you're getting every 6 months, and you're going to do something with it. And the thought process is, well, I'm going to reinvest it. Well, if interest rates fall, your ability to reinvest it at the same rate of return as you're currently getting on that bond have decreased. You either need to take more risk or you need to take lower return. And so you've got risk that the bond portfolio is going to vary, because as the money comes off the bonds, you're not going to be able to reinvest it at the same rate. The rate's going to go up or down. And so, and again, the risk normally is that you'll reinvest at lower prices and you won't be able to get the same rate of return. Yes, sir.
So the whole point, I guess, so is it the difference between security, the decision you have to make is whether you want security or profit, right? Is that weird? Because that's
one of your trade-offs. So if you're getting 8% on a bond for right now, and the market rate is at 6%, and you're going, okay, I need to reinvest at 8% in order to keep my return constant, you're going to need to, at that point, take more risk, because the discount rate or the market rate or the interest rate is the function of risk. So in that particular case, you're going, if I want to invest in the same asset, the same risk level as I currently have, my reinvestment rate is at 6%. If I want to reinvest at 8%, which is what the bonds I bought 6 months ago or a year ago are spinning off to me, I need to take more risk to get 8% now because the market price has shifted. Does that answer the question? Okay. And this just shows essentially there's a term that's called bond duration. I don't think we do bond duration in this class, but essentially it shows the sensitivity of a change in interest rates based upon a change in price and the relationship of the two. So a short-term bond will have a very little shift in price based upon a change in interest rate. So if it was initially priced to yield 8 or 10, excuse me, and interest rates shift, a 1-year bond is going to have a very small change in price because you're going to get the money back. A 15-year bond, if interest rates significantly shift from 10 to 16, you can lose almost half the bond value. And that's being driven by those interest rate risk components. And there's a calculation that essentially shows that, and it's called duration, and it shows the impact of a change in interest rates on the price of a bond. There's some gee whiz data on some bond prices as the bond has changed over time. You can see that as market rates fell, the bond price rose. But even as the market rate fell further, as you got closer to maturity, the bond price approaches the maturity value. And that, my friends, wraps bonds finally. And we will dive into stocks on Wednesday, subject to your questions. Yes, sir.
So if you're trying to make money off of bonds and you're trying to maximize your spread, it would be somewhere in the middle portion of the bond's value, given that it's more that to the last slide.
Last slide. Okay.
Or even the 1 to 15. But so basically, since your bond's value is going to come closest to par at the end of its life, if you wanted to make any money off of the spread of selling this, you would have to sell it somewhere.
Yeah. So if you're a bond trader, if you're someone who likes to trade these things and try to make money on the spread, you're generally going to be trading bonds that have a longer time maturity, because when you look at this graph, if you think interest rates are going to rise or fall and you want to try and trade on that knowledge or that perceived knowledge, you're going to want a longer duration bond. Right? Again, I'm slipping the duration bond. You're going to want a longer duration bond or a longer outstanding term bond, because it's going to be more volatile. So you'll be able to pick up, if interest rates fall, you'll be able to pick up more of a capital gain if you think rates are going to fall. If you think rates are going to rise, you would be able to short sell potentially a portfolio of bonds or take a futures position to be able to pick that up. But you're going to want a longer duration to be able to play interest rate spread. Short duration doesn't do much. Interest rates don't do much on price for short duration bonds. And so that, as a result, you're going to want 15, 30, 40 years. But if that was 40 years, it's going to be even steeper. Any other questions? Okay, I will see you all on Wednesday.